Okay, so what the plan is today and what we have here today are two different 3D printers. So here on my right is the Cubicon 3D printer, and here at the Makerspace, there's two of these. And on the left is an Ender 3 3D printer. So fundamentally, these are both very similar 3D printers. However, the Cubicon printer is much more, I would say, user-friendly and more compatible with somebody who's never 3D printed before. And that's why they're here at the Makerspace, because they're great, they're quick and easy to use. But they function in the same way as something like this Ender 3. They have a lot of similarities, but the Ender 3, you can see more of the working parts and you can learn a little more from this. So the plan for today is that I'm going to demonstrate some of the fundamental skills you might use when you're 3D printing on the Ender 3. And then we're going to switch and take a look at the Cubicon afterwards and talk about how some of those things are handled for you already. And then we can go through the process of putting a print on. And with that all in mind, you should be able to go from start to finish, take your 3D printed CAD file that you designed earlier, load it onto one of these guys and get them printing. Okay, so let's start over here with the Ender 3. And the Ender 3 compared to the Cubicon, it just has a slightly bigger print volume. So this print bed that the prints get printed onto is a little bigger than the Cubicon. Other than that, it's almost exactly the same. They have X, Y, and Z axes. They have an extruder with a hot end that melts plastic. And they use filament that goes into there. And they have some sort of interface and a screen. So the Ender 3 here has a knob and a screen. The Cubicon, as we'll see later, has some buttons. Okay, so before we can even think about printing something, we got to turn our printer on, and they both have a nice big switch on the side. So we'll get the printer turned on first. Okay, and once our printer's on, we have to check a few things before we're ready to go. The first thing I want to check with the printer is that the bed is nice and level. So this is the print bed here. This is where our prints get printed onto. And if it's not level, our melted filament's not going to stick. And we're going to have to, stop our print because it's just not going to work. So we better check that our print bed is level. If you've done a print recently, you don't need to do this every time. But let's pretend we haven't done this in a while. So we're going to check that our print bed's level. So this varies from printer to printer, and we'll talk about it on the Cubicon after. But the first thing you want to do is home your hot end. You can't do this if your hot end's up here somewhere. We want to make sure our hot end's as low as it can go and at its home position. So on the Ender 3, we just go to prepare and auto home. And the printer is going to bring the hot end to its home position. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to use a piece of paper and make sure that our hot end is sitting about a paper's thickness off of our print bed. Before we start moving around our nozzle to the different places on our print bed where we want to check where it's level at, we're going to disable the motors on the 3D printer. And you can do this on this printer and on the Cubicon, because you never want to be moving the hot end or any of these axes manually without disabling the steppers. So on the screen here, we can go to prepare and hit disable steppers. Now the steppers are disabled, I can freely move them. So what I'm going to do here quickly is manually move my axes. So push the print bed, push the hot end to all four corners. And in each corner, I'm just going to slide this piece of paper underneath and just double check that the nozzle is about a paper's thickness off. And you can kind of feel the nozzle rubbing on the paper. That's great. If it needed adjustment, there's some knobs under each corner of the print bed. And I can adjust these up and down, left and right, and feel how that affects the bed height. and adjust it until I get a nice paper's width off the print bed. Now I can manually move the hot end to the next corner and do the exact same thing. So this one, I'm not feeling much resistance from the paper, so I better use this knob and raise the print bed a bit until I start feeling some resistance. So there we go. So you want to do that in each corner. So all 4 corners. You want to do the same thing here. That feels pretty good already. Bring it over here. Try again on the last corner. That feels pretty good. The last thing we want to check is that the middle is roughly level as well. Here it feels a bit high, so I would just lower these front 2 a little bit. Maybe a bit high still, so bring them down just a bit more. And that's better. So I'm happy that my print bed is level now. And once my print bed is level, I can start thinking about preheating my printer, putting the filament on that I want, and starting my print. So let's start with preheating our printer. So this is the same kind of process on all printers. And the reason we want to preheat it is just because it takes a couple minutes. So it's best to start to preheat our printer, then maybe go load our file onto an SD card, which I'll talk about later, and then we can load it onto the printer. But I always like to start off with preheating my printer. So this will vary per printer, but I'll show you on this printer and then I'll show you on the Cubicon. We're going to go to temperature, nozzle, and pick the temperature that we know we want to print at. So whatever you usually set your print temperature at in your slicer, such as Cura, you might want to pick that here. So 215 is a good temperature for PLA, and a bed temperature of about 60 tends to be pretty good. Okay. Now that our printer's preheating, we have to be very careful that we don't touch the hot end because it's going to get to 200 degrees and it'll be pretty easy to burn yourself. So now that our 3D printer is preheating, we're not going to touch it. Thankfully, with a printer like the Cubicon, which we'll talk about later, it has a nice enclosure and you don't have to worry about accidentally grabbing onto your your hot end because it's all protected. And we'll talk about that after, but let's get back to the ender here. So we've leveled our bed and we're preheating the nozzle, the hot end. Let's talk about loading and unloading filament now. So right now there's already a roll of filament loaded and it's running through our extrusion motor into our hot end through this Bowden tube. Okay. Let's check out our temperature. Okay, we're getting up there, 175, 177. So once it gets to about 200, that's hot enough that I can remove my filament. Because now that it's hot enough, the filament is starting to melt in the hot end and it'll easily pull out. So I'm going to go to prepare. And maybe it's under control. Nope, probably prepare. Okay, perfect. We're going to go to move axis, move 1 millimeter, pick our extruder, and we're just going to make it go backwards a bit. And what that's going to do is help pull our filament out. Okay, so my filament actually just broke there, but that's fine. Sometimes that happens, and if that happens, that's no problem. You just need to load your filament, which is fine. So that's what we're going to do next. So with our hot end hot, we're going to come around to our extruder. Every extrusion motor has some sort of clip like this. So we're going to hit the clip. Maybe it's better from this angle. Yeah. I'm going to use this clip and feed our filament in. And if we look at our extruder now, I'll bring it up a little bit. As I hold the clip open and push my filament in, we should see some filament extruding out of our hot end. And when you see the filament extruding out of your hot end, you know that you've loaded your filament correctly. So that's great. So see, this is the filament that just came out of our hot end. So perfect. So we know we've pushed more filament through. So that's our new roll of filament on. Okay, so we're preheated. Our bed is level. We've loaded our filament. We're almost ready to print. So the way we load our files onto this printer is with a micro SD card over here, one of these little guys. And let me just show you what the other printer uses so we can compare. So the Cubicon uses an SD card. The Ender 3 uses a micro SD card. But either way, these are what we want to load our files onto from the slicer, such as Cura. And you might want to use a USB to micro SD or SD adapter to do this. So in this case, your card would just slide into this adapter, and then you plug this into your computer and load your files on.
Sensor,
and that's the same with the micro SD card.
Can I ask a question?
So, oh, maybe the other way around. So yeah, you get your micro SD card into the adapter. This goes into your computer and you can load your files on. So now we're in a good spot. We've preheated our printer. We've loaded filament into our printer. We've made sure the bed is level. The last thing we need to talk about is bed adhesion. So remember how I said earlier, when we're leveling our bed, if it's not level, our print isn't going to stick, and we might just have a ruined print if it's not sticking to the print bed while we're trying to print. So something else you can do to help on an open bed printer like this is use some sort of adhesive that's not permanent. A lot of people like to use a bit of a glue stick on the print bed or a quick spray of hairspray. Whatever you do, make sure it's compatible with your print bed and your printer. The Ender 3 with a glass bed is fine to take that, but with the Cubicon printer, it's all enclosed. We don't have to worry about that. That's only with open bed printers, really. So I've already put a little bit of hairspray on here earlier, so we don't have to worry about doing that. So let's recap what we've done so far. Preheated our printer, loaded our file onto our SD card. We have a level bed. We know our filament's loaded correctly because we saw it extrude out of the hot end. And we're ready to go. So let's go back over to the screen here. I'm going to load my SD card in. And on the screen here, I'm going to go print from SD card. I'm going to refresh this list because I just put my card back in. And I'm going to pick my file. And as soon as I select it, it would start to print. I'm not going to do that now because I don't want to actually start printing now, but that's how you would do it on the Ender 3. And when your print's done, it's pretty simple. You just want to let the printer cool off a little bit before you try to pull your print off the print bed. It'll make it easier if the printer is cool. So when your print is finished and the printer stopped moving and printing, you can just turn it off and you're done. So that's kind of like the basic important parts and important steps you might need to do when you're printing something. What we'll do now is we'll talk about some of those things on the Cubicon or how it makes it easier for you. And we'll talk about the steps to print on there. And then I'll quickly compare the two printers. And then we'll answer any questions if there are any. So let's head over to the Cubicon. So this is the printer that you'd be using in the makerspace if you ever wanted to print something here. There's two of these, and they handle a lot of the more technical things from the Ender that we had to do over there. They handle it for you. Okay, so The first thing we want to do is turn the printer on, and that's on the side here. There's an on and off switch. So I'll just turn the printer on, and it's going to light up. Perfect. So the first thing we did on the Ender was we leveled the bed, but the Cubicon inside here, you can see, there's its bed, just like the Ender. It has a bed too that moves up and down, just like the Ender's bed. Or sorry, the Ender's extruder moves up and down. In this case, the extruder stays put and the bed moves up and down, or maybe the extruder moves up and down. Either way, there's movement in the Z-axis, the X-axis, and the Y-axis. So that's similar between the two printers. Also similar is the hot end. So if you can kind of get a look in here, yeah, this guy here, hot end with an extruder and a nozzle right there. You can see some filament coming out of it there. And the filament on this printer is on the back. So this is where the filament goes here on the back. You can kind of see there, up through the back, and through this tube up top, and into the extruder. Perfect, cool. Okay, I just see a chat message quickly, so why don't I can just go quickly read that. Oh, okay, no problem. It's from Jesse. We can address that later. Okay, so like you can see, it's very similar to the other printer, except that it's enclosed. The enclosure has some pros and cons. So pros being enclosed means there's greater temperature control. The ambient air temperature is has less effect on the print. So if we're printing in a cold environment or a breezy environment, it might be better to use a printer like this, which is great. Also, most prints we do here are with PLA plastic, which is non-toxic. It doesn't really produce fumes. However, if you're printing with something like ABS plastic, it's a little stronger than PLA, but it has the problem of producing some kind of nasty fumes. An enclosed printer like this actually has a fan and a filter on the side to filter some of those fumes out. So it's more friendly for printing unfriendly types of plastic. Okay, so like I said before, the Cubicon printer doesn't need to be leveled because it does it by itself. But the way it does that is it uses some contacts on the print bed, which hopefully we can get in here and see. So there's 1, 2, hard to see, 3, 4, 5 at the back, those silver looking contacts at the back on the print bed. That's how it's going to reference those points to know how high it is. And instead of instead of us leveling it, it's going to auto level. But we need to make sure those contacts are clean. So if you haven't used the printer in a while, it's good to take one of these brushes with a little wire mesh brush on the end. And we're just going to brush those contacts off a little bit. And that's just going to make sure there's good conductivity on them. And the nozzle can detect when it's touching them. And that's going to make sure that when the bed levels itself at the start of every print, it's going to be accurate. Okay, so instead of leveling the print bed manually, as we did on the Ender printer, here we just are going to make sure those contacts are clean. Okay, just like the Ender, we can preheat it. So let's come over to the screen here. Great, okay. So when you turn on the printer, it's just going to give you a status screen like this. But if we hit OK to go to our menu, we can go down to temperature. And let's first set our extruder. So down to extruder, OK. And let's go up to 215 again, just like we did on the Ender. Okay, and when we're done, we can just hit OK. So our extruder is now heating to 215. And let's put our bed to 60 again. So bed, and get that up to 60. Okay, so just like that, we are now preheating the Cubicon just like we did before. Let's pretend again that we wanted to change our filament. So it's a little bit different on the Cubicon. We're gonna go back to our menu. So I'm on the temperature screen still. So I'm gonna go back to our prepare screen. So one up and into prepare and down to unload filament. Okay. And now you can see on our screen, it's still preheating from when I set it to 215 before. So it's telling us to wait. So we'll just wait a few seconds till we get to 215. It shouldn't be too long. While we're doing that though, while it's preheating, let's take a look at what a new roll of filament looks like. So they come in a box like this, and inside the box is the new roll of filament. Okay. Right. And you can see that it's plastic wrapped and vacuum packed with a little desiccant pack in it, some silica beads. And the reason they do that is because 3D printing filament is sensitive to moisture in the air. And as it absorbs moisture, it becomes more brittle. So they do this to keep it from absorbing moisture in the air in its package. I recommend that everybody keeps these silica packets that come with it and store them in a closed container like a Tupperware or something with these silica packets when they're not using it, and that's going to preserve the filament. So our printer is still heating up a little bit. So I'll open up this new roll of filament and we'll actually unload the roll that's on here and load this new roll on. So just gonna open it up, pull off the plastic. So here's the roll of filament. And here's that little silica packet that you might want to hold on to. Okay, so we have our roll. Here's the end of the roll. They always, I guess the start of the roll, they always thread it through the roll itself so we can keep track of it. You can see here that this is very bent and this isn't going to go through our printer nicely. We need a nice smooth filament. So I like to just break off that bent piece and we can discard that. We don't need that anymore. And we have our new roll of filament with a nice clean end ready to go into our printer. So set this aside quickly and let's take a look at our printer screen again. And as you can see, it's actually preheated now. Okay, and we're gonna go down to unload, start, and press OK. And you can watch the watch inside of the printer there. The hot end is just gonna center itself. It's gonna extrude a little bit, and then it's going to start going backwards. And it's just telling us to wait, so we'll wait. And now it's telling us pull out filament. So remember on the ender, there is a filament holding clip that we pressed by the extruder motor when we were pushing new filament in. Well, the Cubicon has that too. There's a little clip in here. We're gonna push the clip down, pull out the Bowden tube and our filament. And there we go. There's the end of our filament. Okay, so from the back of the printer, maybe you can see. I can't actually see. That's okay. Not too important. There's just a hole where the filament goes in, and we'll pull it out. Well, yeah, it looks good. We'll wrap it up a bit. Okay, and here you can see here, so I've taken this roll of filament out. I'm just going to poke the filament through this hole here, just so we don't lose the end. Nice, okay, so there's our old roll of filament. We can set that aside. Our new roll of filament. Find the end again that I just had somewhere. Bear with me. This is why they put it through the side of the roll, so you don't lose it like I did, but you should be able to find it in a sec here. There it is. So it's important that you never lose that end of the filament or get it tangled up or anything, but we're good. We found it. I'm just going to put this roll back on the back of the printer. Yeah, that focus looks good. So roll is on the back on the filament holder. And you can see here the hole that filament's going to get pushed through. So as I push it through, it's going to start coming through this Bowden tube again. There we go. That's great. Okay, so we have our new filament coming through our Bowden tube. Perfect. Let's go to our screen quickly, because now we're going to want to load this filament. So can you see the screen there in the front of the printer?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, let's take a look at the screen here. Okay, so we've unloaded, we've pulled out the filament when it told us to put our new filament on the back of the printer. Let's go back here, back one more time, and it's up to load filament. Press OK. So it's already at temperature, so we're good. We can go down, load start, loading, touch OK button to load stop. Okay, so we're just going to take our filament end, put it through this hole into our hot end, and we're going to push down this clip like I talked about before. Just going to let it into the hot end and just push a bit, and it should start taking once it's in deep enough. There we go. So it's actually pulling on the filament now, pulling it through the printer. And if you look down at our nozzle, you can see the filament coming out that it's pulling in to the hot end, which is great. Let that go a bit. And we also want to make sure our Bowden tube is pressed into the top of the hot end properly. So that's this clear tube on the outside. And we're just going to push it in. So it feels like it's in pretty good. We know we're extruding properly because we have our filament coming out the bottom like we just saw, right? This is all coming out now. So we're good with that. We can press OK to stop the loading. And it just says, good, we're back at our menu. We've stopped loading, so we're good. So we can close up the top cover and clear out all this excess filament that just got extruded. Okay, and we don't need that anymore, so we can get rid of this. Okay, so let's recap what we've done so far. So on the Cubicon, we turned it on. We cleaned off the auto leveling contacts. We preheated it. We unloaded our old roll of filament. We put on and unboxed and put on a new roll of filament, and we loaded it successfully. We saw it extrude, so we know we're good there. Okay. So that's good. And we're kind of ready to print now because we're preheated and we have our filament loaded. So similar to the Ender, instead of using a micro SD card, we use an SD card, but we still have to load our files on here the same way. So once they're loaded on using maybe a USB adapter, we have our files on the SD card. We can just insert the SD card into the side here Okay. And we can start a print. So as soon as I put the SD card in, it asks me if I want to print from an SD card file. But let's say the SD card was already in there. We can just press OK to go to the menu again. Select SD card, and there we are. So we can see all our files that are on there and the folders too. So let's say I wanted to print this first file here. I up and down to select it, OK. And there you go. It's actually going to start preheating and it'll start printing. The first thing you'll notice it'll do is it'll auto level itself. So it's gonna check those 5 points that we cleaned off at the beginning to make sure the bed is level. And then it'll start the print. So let's let it start. It's just preheating right now. Oh, okay. Actually, it's preheated already, so we can watch it. So let's just make sure it's starting properly. And this is another very important thing for 3D printing to keep in mind. You never want to leave your printer while it's printing, especially on the first layer. So the first layer of plastic that's put down is the most prone to not adhering to the build plate and messing up your print and clogging your printer. Oh, might need to be realigned a bit there, actually. It's all good. Oh yeah, there we go. It's cleaning itself. That's great. Yep, and now it's checking its leveling. So it's using those points that we cleaned off earlier. And then, sorry, like I was saying before, you never want to leave it unattended for the first layer because that's where it's most prone to coming off the build platform. So I like to always watch the first layer go down and make sure that there's no problems with the print. So let's just give it a sec here to level itself, which is what we're seeing here. Yeah, while we're letting that start to print, I can check the chat. Yeah, April asks if the printer can take different types of filament and is there an easy reference to know what temperature to set our prints at? So yes, it can take different types of filament. That's a good question. A resource I made for the second 3D printing workshop when we talked about slicing for preparing for the print. So once we had our file, we talked about slicing. In that PowerPoint, I referenced a couple different types of filament and the temperatures that they are printable at. But to give you an example, PLA, which is the most common plastic, wants to be printed at around 200, 215 degrees. But other than that, the filament usually, actually this one doesn't say, but usually they'll have a recommendation on there what to print at. So you can sometimes check your filament roll. You can check the PowerPoint I made for our last workshop, which I'm sure we can be put it so it's available somewhere, or you can check some resources online. Okay, here we go. So it's actually starting the print now, which you can see. And we'll let that first layer go down quickly. I'll check the chat one more time. How long does it take to heat up? April asked earlier. As you saw, not too long, just a few minutes, and it'll show you the temperature that it's at as it's heating up, so you can get an idea of its progress. I'm just going to close. Yeah, this is what we're printing right now. So it's just a plate, and It's already kind of started on the first layer, so that's pretty good. To get an idea of its progress, you can see on the screen here, if I close the front door, it says 3%. So you can keep an eye on it and see how close it is to finishing. Okay. So now that we've got a print set up and started on here, let me just recap very briefly what we talked about and summarize the differences between these two types of printers and what the printers here in the makerspace are really best for. So similarities between these two types of printers is they both have like an X, Y, and Z axis. So they both move X, Y, and Z on Cartesian coordinates. And that's how they know where they are. That's the directions and how they move. They all have a hot end with an extruder nozzle. They all have some sort of extruder motor here with a clip that you need to press in when you're loading in your filament. They both use filament that comes on a roll like this. They both have a build plate with a certain area. That brings us to a difference though. So Ender 3 has a much bigger build plate than the Cubicon printer here. So almost double the size in area. So that's a consideration you have to take into account when you're deciding what printer is best for your project. Another difference in the two is, like I mentioned earlier, the Cubicon printer is enclosed, so it's more resilient to surrounding air temperature, and it also keeps enclosed any kind of fumes that might be generated by printing by the filament as it's melted. However, PLA is pretty safe, so it's okay to use PLA on open and closed bed printers. Another difference between the two, as you saw again, the Cubicon is much more user-friendly. It does the bed leveling for you, and it makes loading and unloading pretty easy. The Ender 3, that's all manual, so we talked about it, but it just takes more work to level your bed, load your filament. Overall, though, the Cubicon is a great printer. It can, really anything you throw at it, it'll be able to do. Operates really silently. Yeah, so really great for kind of anything you need to work on. I think that's all I wanted to say about that. Oh, cost is a big one. True. Yeah. So if you were trying to grab one of these for yourself, the cost is certainly quite a bit different. The Ender 3 costs $200 to $300, so way lower barrier to entry, but you pay for that lower cost and the extra kind of steps you have to do yourself. Compared to the Cubicon, yes, it's more automated. However, it costs quite a bit more, maybe on the realm of about $1,000. So $2,000 actually, yeah, more on the realm of about $2,000. So you can see it's much, kind of cleaner, nicer, more automated, but you pay for it. Thankfully here at the Makerspace, there's two of these here. So that's not really a problem if you wanted to come and use these. I'm just going to check the chat to see if there's any more questions. So okay, so yeah, these are some good questions. Okay, I'll address those. So one of the questions was, can we leave it overnight for a very long print? Yeah, you can definitely leave these once they start going, as long as you feel comfortable with it. The most important thing is to make sure you watch that first layer go down. Once that first layer goes down, you know that the foundation of your print is adhered to the build platform, and it's less likely that it's going to become detached in the middle of printing. So as long as that first layer goes down, you're probably good to leave it to finish. There's another question from Mary that asks if we're limited to one file. Yeah, you got to print one file at a time. But remember, if you wanted to adjust what you're printing, you could just do that in your slicing software. So if you had one small thing to print, but you actually wanted 5 of them, you could just import that same CAD file into your slicer 5 times, slice the 5 small objects together, and load that sliced file onto the printer, and it'll do multiple ones at a time. So that's how you would handle trying to print more than one thing at once. Just import more than one file into your slicer at the same time, and then slice them together, and then they'll all print together. There was a question about changing filaments halfway through. Technically, you can do that. You can pause the print. But like, I wouldn't recommend doing that, because then your hot end just, it might cool down and heat up in the middle of the print. It increases the chances for your nozzle getting jammed. And it also just, the more changes you do to the printer during your print, you're just increasing the chances that something is going to go wrong. So while you can pause it, load and unload filament like we talked about, I recommend not doing that, just letting it print in one color. And you can always paint it or something after if you want to address the color. Let me just double check the chat one more time to see if there's any questions. And yep, April just brings up a good point. There's no limit on the time you can be in the makerspace as long as there's somebody here with you. So if you wanted to stay for a print to make sure it prints okay, you can stay as long as logistically there's someone here to facilitate that. But otherwise, I guess you could leave it printing and pick it up at another time. I think there's maybe one more question. Oh, awesome. Awesome. Jesse's just saying thanks. Cool. Yeah, I guess I'll just quickly finish up and then I'll hand it back to Teo. So thanks for coming today. Thanks for watching. I hope this is a really useful resource, and just learning about the 2 types of printers was useful. And not only will this allow you to use the printer here in the makerspace, but hopefully some of the skills you've learned, you can apply to other printers like the Ender or the many other 3D printers that exist there on the market. So thanks again. And I will pass it back to Teo now to just conclude our workshop. So thanks again.